I want you to imagine that you are a Bay Area homeowning resident working a 9-to-5 job and you use BART, or the Bay Area Rapid Transit, to commute to work every day. Now, as a BART commuter, there are a few things in life that faze you. You're used to frequent train breakdowns right during rush hour, seeing pet lizards on seats, or hearing a man talk really loudly in great detail right next to you about his colonoscopy. But more seriously, BART passengers have become unfazed by much grimmer sights. BART commuters have all seen things that look like this, and this. Through this presentation, I hope to tell you a story about how a transportation agency has come to symbolize the state of California's uncoordinated, undocumented response to the homelessness crisis. In order to tell you the story, I must first explain to you the evolution of BART's response to homelessness. We then turn to assessing the efficacy of how BART connects social services with its unhoused passengers. Finally, we use this knowledge of BART's challenges with addressing its homelessness crisis to explore recommendations for the transit agency to adopt. Ultimately, we will uncover how these recommendations for BART involve the effort of local and state governments. First, our story starts with defining the problem. Among the over 161,000 Californians who face homelessness, 35,000 of them reside in the Bay Area, a sharp increase of 25% since 2017. Over the same span of time, the percentage of unhoused riders aboard BART trains has dramatically increased by 50%, seeing an average of 160 unhoused passengers per every 100 car trains. As a frequent BART passenger and California native myself, I wanted to know why the homelessness epidemic has continued to grow despite increased attention and resources to the crisis. Thus, I asked myself to use BART's microcosmic similarity to California's struggle with housing and think, by imagining a better BART, how can I imagine a better California? More specifically, I wanted to know, in what ways does BART's social service provisions to its unhoused riders illuminate California's struggle to connect its homeless population with much needed economic and housing resources? So, what has BART done to address the growing presence of homelessness at its stations? In a report about National Transit Agency practices in interacting with unhoused people, the American Public Transportation Authority describes a general evolution of how transit centers respond to homelessness. Beginning from a place of reluctance to devote resources to the homelessness, transit agencies then move on to usually ineffective law enforcement strategies before finally forming partnerships with social services and nonprofit agencies. Based on an evaluation of BART's press releases and interviews with BART officials and passengers, I would argue that BART is here at the precipice of making a transition from enforcement to social service strategies. Before 2013, in regard to homelessness, BART did not have formal policies, dedicated employees, or pre-allocated funding to invest in resources or programs. Instead, BART relied upon its police department to remove unhoused individuals from its stations. A change in policy came in 2013 when BART PD made the decision to hire a full-time crisis intervention training specialist named Armando Sandoval, one of the only full-time employees at a transit agency in the US dedicated to addressing homelessness. In addition, BART also drew up contracts with Bay Area counties to provide homeless outreach teams to serve at its San Francisco and Contra Costa County service locations. Updates to BART's new approach to tackling homelessness were made as recently as February 2021, with the rollout of the agency's Strategic Homeless Action Plan, which details a goal to hire 20 new social workers. But with all of these changes, we have to ask ourselves, did the homelessness crisis actually get better? In a recent 2020 customer satisfaction report, passengers cited addressing homelessness as one of the most important attributes that the agency faces, but also the attribute the agency does worst with handling. At this point in my research, it seemed extremely puzzling to me that there were these two very different trends happening. On one hand, it seems that BART has never devoted more attention and resources to the homelessness crisis at its stations. But on the other hand, the number of unhoused passengers has reached record highs. In fact, every single one of the 16 BART passengers I spoke with at the South Bay, Oakland, and San Francisco stations, they all vehemently agreed that the homelessness crisis has only gotten worse, much worse, over the time that many of these BART lifers have taken the transit system. One woman I spoke with, who was previously unhoused herself, had this to say about the state's homelessness crisis. They're criminalizing being displaced. The city, BART, everybody. They've turned their backs on homelessness. For the longest time, wouldn't even acknowledge us. And now they acknowledge us, but they don't want anything to do with it. So this paradox brings us to the next part of the story. What exactly is going wrong? My research indicates two main issues: incoordination and a lack of formal social service government partnerships. First, on incoordination. There is a lack of collaboration within BART where social service provision is concerned. When I spoke with BART frontline workers, they stated that they did not receive any internal agency communication about the homeless resource programs, which ironically enough, BART has touted with substantial local media coverage. The employees told me that if there was a crisis involving an unhoused individual at the station, their first call is to BART PD, a reflection of BART's pre-2013 practices. BART's frontline workers, the employees' agencies describes as being the most visible and most accessible to riders, are not informed of resources and social services BART offers unhoused individuals. Quite simply, this is all to show that BART's right hand does not know what its left hand does. The second main issue with BART's current response to homelessness is a lack of partnerships with local county governments. There are two facets to this specific problem. The first is that government contracted service providers do not openly share data with BART. And such data is important when it comes to agency being able to determine where to spend its financial capital on homeless outreach. The second facet of this government transit partnership problem is that there isn't enough coordination between county and BART efforts to address homelessness. BART has been unable to station a homeless outreach team in Alameda County or Santa Clara County, despite BART offering to pay for such resources, interestingly enough. Such problems stand in the way of innovative solutions, such as establishing client intake centers staffed by social workers at transit facilities and stations, whose public access nature makes it an impactful place for local governments to concentrate outreach efforts. In order for BART to overcome these obstacles and achieve this vision of caring for the well-being of its unhoused patrons, some of my recommendations for BART include the following to be incorporated in their strategic homeless action plan. First is to invest in the training and equipping of BART frontline workers on homeless action resources and de-escalation training. The second is that BART must prioritize creating a fully functional signed partnership with social service agencies, facilitating the sharing of data and critical areas of improvement at regular stakeholder meetings. Before I conclude, I'd like to ask you a question that I asked every single one of my interviewees. Given all that I've told you, do you think it's BART's responsibility to address the homelessness crisis? I would argue that it's unclear. But sadly enough, regardless of how you answer that question, it still remains that whether or not BART or California likes it, the homelessness crisis is already at BART stations. Thus, in reevaluating how BART can address this humanitarian crisis through better social service provisions, we would do well to consult this Japanese proverb. Who will do the hard thing? Those who can't. Who will do the impossible thing? Those who care. I would argue that BART and California should care. Thank you.